I can still hear the screech of my violin in that cold rehearsal hall, its sound spiraling upward, wild and sharp and out of control. This memory, forever carved into my bones, always brings the same acid sting of shame. Even now, years later, it sometimes wakes me in the middle of the night. The ceiling lights dripped a hard, white glare onto the old wooden floors as the jury fiddled with their pens and sheets, faces closed off, arms folded. My bow trembled in my hand, but it wasn't the jury who undid me. It was my Uncle Elaine sitting at the back of the hall, legs spread wide, nose curled. I caught his whisper to my father, "Too delicate, this one, he's not cut out for it." My fingers froze at the tip of the last run, the notes tangled and my violin wailed. The sound barked off the walls, a disaster. I know now it wasn't just Elaine's words or the jury's notes. It was all the years of everybody telling me the same thing in different ways. Don't do it, don't be foolish. I stared at my instrument like it had burned me. In some ways it had. There was a very brittle silence, and then the shuffle of papers, the shifting of seats, and the scrape of someone dragging a chair back to leave. I wanted to dissolve right there on the spot, just fade into the floor and seep between the boards. After, outside the hall, it started to rain in those sudden Parisian bursts. My father waited beneath an awning, already shaking his head when I got close enough. "You panicked," he said. "You let them get to you." I shrugged, the violin case feeling heavier in my hand than it had ever felt before. My mind spun with all the lessons, the pressure, my mother's hopeful glances, my father's stern guidance, how all of it had collapsed in a single moment. My father's lips pressed thin, he took my arm gently. "Maybe something else suits you better, engineering or law, like Elaine's boy. Everyone needs something to stand on, Benoit, something real." You have no idea, that's what I wanted to say. That my dream was already different from theirs. I carried it in my fingers, in the ache that mysteriously thrummed in my hands whenever I touched a violin, not to play it, but to understand it, to feel the pulse of the wood, the way it came alive. That was the last time anyone in my family spoke about music or violins as if it was still a real possibility for me. At dinners, talk shifted around what my cousin was doing at university or my sister's good grades. I stopped attending the lessons my parents had scraped to afford. My violin languished untouched beneath my bed, but the longing did not die, it simply changed its shape. My mother found me one evening working with a battered old violin I'd bought from a flea market hidden under a tarp along Rue Ville du Temple, cracking it open along the seams, peering at the grain, touching the soundpost, investigating how everything fit inside. She watched with wide, damp eyes. "Benoit, are you ruining that?" she asked, "just seeing how it works." She shook her head. "No one makes these things anymore, factory business. You want to play or you want to ruins." I wanted both, but I couldn't explain it then. There was no one to show me how to sculpt, how to carve, how to coax music from wood instead of my hands. The rest of the world moved on without me. My friends trickled away to real careers. I worked odd jobs, cafes, delivery, supermarket aisles, always saving what little I had for glue, for scraps of maple or spruce I could find beneath the Pont Marie at the old luthier's haunts. At night, with calloused hands and bone-deep fatigue, I would look through lutherie forums and faded pages of books borrowed, never bought from the library. In the silence of borrowed rooms, I'd draw scrolls on cheap graph paper, only for my sister to roll her eyes and bury herself in her phone. In Marais, there's a cluster of ancient luthier shops, most of them surviving on nostalgia and tourists. The best among them seemed unreachable. I would hover around their windows like a ghost, peering in at the smooth, gleaming backs of unfinished cellos, rows of varnishes glinting like precious stones. My world was hunger and yearning. I carried my shame with me like a stone in my shoe. The lowest point was the winter I spent sorting cardboard and mopping floors in the cold cavern of a neighborhood supermarket. I'd work the morning shift, come home stiff and stinking, and whittle headstocks with a dull knife as the cold ticked beneath my window glass. My father had stopped mentioning university. My uncle, ever blunt, would sneer at holidays, "Still tinkering, there's no future in dust and splinters, boy, find yourself a suit." I stopped answering, I stopped talking to almost everyone. There's a solitude that grows sharp with longing, it's cold but it clarifies. The bitterness turned to resolve. I made my first entire instrument in secret, a misshapen, uneven violin from scavenged maple and a neck rescued from a trash pile. When I first drew the bow across it, the sound was thin, reedy and trembling, but it responded, my God, it responded. I wept quietly, holding it to my chest. It wasn't a masterpiece, but it was a beginning. Word of mouth, surprisingly, is alive and well in Paris. The first time someone offered me money to repair a viola, an older woman from my block with arthritic hands, I couldn't quite believe it. She pressed coins in my palm, told me, "You have clever fingers, Benoit, don't let the big shops swallow you up." It was a small dignity, but it meant the world. A year turned, then two. I kept making, cutting, failing, remaking. I made friends among the city's few die-hard luthiers, old men with thick glasses and hands that had more notches than a month-old baguette. They taught me grudgingly, sparingly, but enough. I pored over tonewood, tapped for resonance, sanded until my thumbs blistered. My respect for the work grew with each failure. Still, I was the odd one out in my family. My father rarely asked how I was, satisfied that the subject was behind us, that I'd moved on for good. The city around me glittered with promise I dared not reach for. I took pride in the quiet work. I became obsessed with the details, the roll of varnish under my brush, the slow, sweet curl of a maple shaving, the way light caught in the arch of a belly. These became my music. They filled my heart in a way performance never had. Sometime in my third year, an opportunity ducked into my shop while I was scraping a sound post. His name was Thomas, a restless, sharp-eyed cellist studying at the conservatoire. He was hunting for something unmistakable. An instrument with character, built by someone who actually listened to players. He drew a hesitant note from one of my unfinished cellos, then turned to me, eyebrows lifted. "You made this." I nodded, half expecting laughter. Instead, he grinned wide. "It sings, but with a rasp that's rare." He played a phrase from some modern concerto, each note blooming rich and unexpected. "Can you finish it for me?" I worked for weeks, sometimes sleepless, sanding, scraping, testing. I poured everything, my shame, my hope, my courage, into the downy fibers of that cello. When it was ready, Thomas brought his teacher, a severe woman with a nose for excellence. She circled the cello as if it might scuttle away, but when she heard him play it, she nodded barely and flashed the faintest smile. "You've got something here, Benoit." Within months, word spread among the musicians. Soon, the big shops in the Marais started getting curious, then coolly resentful. I had violins and violas going out to orchestras, conservatory students, even one nervy jazz musician who insisted my instruments changed his whole tone. Man, it was exhilarating and terrifying. I had proof now, but the shame needed somewhere to go. It persisted, clinging in the corners of my heart, a reminder that I was never meant by any of them to belong here. Then, out of nowhere, came the invitation that changed everything, an email from the conservatoire's new head, asking if I would consider crafting a violin for their annual soloist prize. It felt like a mistake, some hidden test. I told myself I wasn't ready. I forced myself to reply with a yes. I threw myself into the work like a man possessed. The design, the sourcing of tonewood from a dealer near Lake Geneva, the varnish formula altered a half-dozen times. Each late night, hunched over in lamplight, I remembered that first disastrous jury, the cold faces, Elaine's snicker. I was building my own answer to all of them with every curled shaving of wood. When the violin was complete, I carried it myself through the wrought iron gates and marble corridors of the conservatoire. The air was thick with old music and quiet competition. They ushered me into the main hall, which glimmered under gold flourishes and red velvet seats, untouched since my last humiliating recital, only now I walked in through a different door. The event was formal. Conservatory faculty, officials, patrons, and the student finalists. I wore my only suit, sweat prickled down my spine. I didn't anticipate my family would come. I hadn't told them, but word had a way of reaching home, especially with the old women in our block talking. My mother must have pressed, because there they were, clutching programs, my father stiff, my mother's smile anxious, Elaine behind them, cheeks pink, arms crossed. I felt the air leave my body. What if it all happened again? What if, in this grand hall, my craft was found wanting and they would witness my shame for a second, final time? The violin sat in a velvet-lined box on stage. When the conservatoire's chair rose to speak, my name rang out clear as a church bell. This year, crafted by a Paris luthier of extraordinary promise, Benoit Gauthier. I blinked hard, blinking the sweat from my brow. The soloist, a young woman with electric eyes, took the violin and nodded gratefully. She played and played. Her first notes sang out pure and shimmering. The violin responded, opening up beneath her touch, rich, sonorous, tender. Up in the balcony, someone gasped. There was no screech, no wildness. It held the room in golden sound. I felt the tears stinging my eyes. I glanced back just once to where my family sat, my father frozen, mouth parted, Elaine hunched forward, blinking as if unwilling to believe the evidence of his own ears. My mother pressed trembling fingers to her lips. The applause hit me physically, rolling down from the seats, washing over me like rain. The jury, some of them the same from my childhood, stood, some even smiling. The student soloist searched me out in the ranks, her gratitude simple, generous. After, in the swirl of bodies and words, all the old doubts began to fade, replaced by something slow and warm, true belonging. Faculty, former critics, students I'd met in the back rooms of Marais, all clapped me on the shoulder, pressed business cards into my palm, asked me to repair this, design that. But for me, none of it measured up to the moment my father and mother edged carefully into the circle around me, and Elaine, awkward and pink-faced, nodded stiffly. My father looked at the violin as if it was some rare bird. "You made that?" "Yes," I said, struggling to steady my voice. He nodded, pride mingled with apology and awe. "Your grandfather made furniture, but not like this. I never saw, never imagined." Elaine grunted, checking the violin's seams, then snorted. "You always were stubborn. Turns out so was I." He managed a smile, prouder, warmer than I ever expected. I watched as others came up, parents with shy children who dreamed of orchestras, local musicians hopeful their old instruments might live again, old rivals grudgingly respectful. I greeted each, tired but certain. After it all ended, I walked with my family beneath the Paris streetlights, the city humming around us. My father draped his arm over my shoulder for the first time in years. My mother sighed, relief mixed with joy. At the end of the block before we parted, my father squeezed my shoulder. "Come by tomorrow," he said. "We'd like to see your shop." For a while, I just stood in the cool night, letting the lights and noises swirl. I traced the curve of the violin's scroll with my thumb, not as an answer to their old wounds, but as a homecoming to myself and to the city that had doubted and made me. Sometimes, late at night, I'll play a few quiet notes on one of my own violins. They aren't always perfect, but they are true, and through the window, Paris is endless, full of memory, music, and courage enough to start again.